us the best way to live, he taught us how to do it as well. As the only person who ever humaned perfectly, he is the person that we really should take our cues from when it comes to how we just live our lives. It's remarkable how practical some of Jesus' teachings were. He taught us about things about how to deal with enemies. He taught us about how to address things about marriage or parenting. He taught us so many things that were just practical. One of those things even had to do with about how much rest we get. Now, this is a pretty incredible thing if you think about it, because it's only been recently, within the last few hundred years, that science and medical science have caught up with this idea that we need rest, that our bodies don't function well without it. All kinds of health problems come up when we don't get enough rest. Increased chances for diabetes and heart disease, accidents, all kinds of things happen simply from a lack of rest. But you know, God, who created us, who formed us in His image, knew that. The one who built us, who owns the owner's manual and wrote it, actually put it in the rhythm of creation that there would be 6 days of work and 1 day of rest. If you go back to the very beginning of Genesis, there's this poem that talks about the creation story. And God created things on the six days of creation, and then on the seventh day, the scripture says, He rested. Now, if you think about that for a minute, it doesn't make a lot of logical sense, because if He really is God, does He ever get tired? Does He really need to rest? Well, the answer is obviously no. So why did He rest on the seventh day? It was to show us how we need to rest. He knew our limitations by forming us. And so later on, as humans go through the course of history, they completely violate this idea of rest. And so God sends down these rules, these 10 ways to be human. We know them as the 10 Commandments, and Moses gave them. And one of those rules was, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Now, this is remarkable because the Hebrew people at this time in human history were the only people who had ever taken a day off. If you've ever appreciated having a day off or having a weekend, you can thank God for that because it was His idea. The Hebrew people modeled this, and they went through this rhythm of working for 6 days and resting on the seventh. Now, that may not seem so strange to us, but in an agrarian economy where if you didn't work, you didn't eat that night, this was a remarkable expression of faith and trust in God. But like so many things, religion gets involved in this, and pretty soon what is meant to be helpful becomes a burden. And so religious people would say, you know what, we need to take a day off because that's how we can best demonstrate our religious faithfulness. And then somebody else would say, hey, you know what, it's not even okay to go out into your barns on the Sabbath day. And another person would say, well, you're so religious by not going into your barns, I'm not even going to open my door. And so this competition started between religious people till the time that Jesus came. And in Jesus' day, there was so much debate about the Sabbath. Something that, remember, was really for our own good. Something that was just part of the rhythm of what it meant to enjoy God's creation and to live the best possible way of being human. And so Jesus had these encounters with religious people that always seemed to happen on the Sabbath day, as Jesus did so many miracles and so many things on the Sabbath that violated these religious people's rules and their laws. In fact, in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 6, we see 2 occasions where Jesus violates these Sabbath laws. Read this with me to see what happened. Luke chapter 6, beginning in verse 1. On a Sabbath, while He was going through the grain fields, His disciples plucked and ate some heads of grain, rubbing them in their hands. So Jesus and His posse are just walking along. They're hungry. They just picked some grain out of the field, which was completely legal to do, except that it was on the Sabbath. But some of the Pharisees said, "Why are you doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath?" And Jesus answered them, "Have you not read what David did when he was hungry, and he and those with him went into the house of God and took and ate the bread of presence, which is not lawful for any but a priest to eat, and also gave it to them to eat? And He said to them, the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath." Now, this is kind of a strange story, and it requires some knowledge of Old Testament history. Jesus knew the religious crowd well, and so He pulled up one of their heroes out of the Old Testament, David, and He reminded them of a time that David and his posse were walking along. They were actually running from Saul, and they went into this temple, and the bread of the presence was there. Now, the bread of the presence was this bread that the priests were charged to make every day. They baked it fresh, and they would sit it on the altar. And it was for God. It represented the presence of God in the temple. At the end of the day, if the bread was still there, which it always was, the priests were allowed to take the bread, cut it up, and eat it themselves. And then the next day, they'd bake fresh bread and it'd start all over again. So Jesus is referring to a time when David and his posse are walking along and they go into the temple and they're starving and they eat the bread and it wasn't legal for them to do it. And so Jesus' point is pretty clear. Hey, if David did what wasn't lawful to do, then isn't this the same? Aren't we following in David's footsteps? Your religious hero, aren't we just doing the same thing? Well, then Luke goes on and he tells another story. He said in Luke 6, verse 6, on another Sabbath, Jesus, entered the synagogues and was teaching, and a man was there whose right hand was withered. And the scribes and the Pharisees watched him to see whether he would heal on the Sabbath, so that they might find a reason to accuse him. But he knew their thoughts, and he said to the man with the withered hand, come up and stand here. I love this, because Jesus could have just healed him, but instead he actually called the guy up in front of everybody so the religious crowd would know that Jesus was actually violating the Sabbath. And he rose and he stood there, and Jesus said to them, I ask you, is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save life or to destroy it? And after looking around at them all, he said to him, stretch out your hand. And he did so, and his hand was restored. But they were filled with fury and disgust with one another what they might do to Jesus. Now, this is so typical of religious people, taking something that God meant as a gift and weaponizing it and using it to try to control people. And Jesus called them out on it. Now, don't forget, Jesus wasn't just another religious teacher or a great philosopher. He was God himself, God in flesh. So Jesus is the one who instituted this day of rest. Jesus is the one who gave the commandment, hey, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. Jesus knew what the Sabbath was all about. These guys didn't know. And so Jesus is trying to point out to them, hey, the Sabbath is meant to bring healing and wholeness. The Sabbath is meant to restore what is broken in people. And so Jesus wanted us to know that it's important for us to be good humans, that we get some rest. Now, what's so important about this for us is that in our world today where we're so busy, we're so distracted, we're pulled in so many different directions, it's easy for us to live from day to day and hour to hour, filling up our time with all kinds of obligations and commitments and never getting any rest. Eventually that will catch up with you physically, but it will also catch up with you emotionally and spiritually as well. And Jesus is saying that's no way to be human. The best way to be human is recognize the natural rhythm of life, the natural rhythms of the pattern I've set, and join in those. The Sabbath is one of those things that sets healthy boundaries for us, and it invites us to trust God. You know, so many times we're convinced that it's by our hard work and effort that we live and breathe and have our being. And the Sabbath is one of those ways that we are reminded, hey, we can stop and trust God. That we will be faithful to work as hard as we can, but at the end of the day, it's not our work that saves us, it's God that saves us. It's God who provides for us, and the Sabbath helps to teach us that. But the Sabbath is more than that. The Sabbath is also that time when heaven touches earth. You know, in the Jewish mindset, there were these places that they set up, these places where heaven and earth would collide. One of those was the temple, where in the Holy of Holies, they believed that God's presence dwelled over the Ark of the Covenant. This was that place where heaven touched earth, the geography, but also in time, the Sabbath was that day when all things about heaven would be brought to earth. The peace, the wholeness, the healing that we all long for can be found on the Sabbath. That's what it means to remember the Sabbath and to keep it holy. This is why Jesus healed people on the Sabbath, because the Sabbath is about making things on earth that are wrong right. The Sabbath is about taking things that are broken and making them whole again. The Sabbath points us beyond itself. It points to a better reality that we all long for and hope for. We get to enter into that kind of rest, that kind of peace when we remember the Sabbath and keep it holy, not in a religious, legalistic way, but in a way that gives life to us and to others. By engaging with other hurting people and saying we're bringing Sabbath rest to them by healing what is hurting in their lives, by bringing food to those who are hungry, by caring for those who are sick and those who are alone. This is what Sabbath rest is all about. And ultimately, the Sabbath points beyond itself to Jesus. The Sabbath is all about Him. When Jesus said, the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath, what He was really saying is that this day of rest has always been about me. It's always been about what I am going to bring into creation. It's all about what I am going to bring into the rhythm of this world as it was intended to be. And so the Sabbath is Jesus. We find our rest and our hope in Him. You know, I've been tired before, as I'm sure you have. You work a long week and you just need a day off. But there's another kind of tired that maybe you've experienced too. I think we've all experienced it after this past year. It's a tired that just one day off doesn't fix. It's a tired that really even a vacation can't exactly fix. It's a tired that just says, man, we're so tired of the brokenness and the injustice. We're so tired of all the things in this world that are wrong. And the Sabbath is a reminder that all of this is temporary and God has got a plan. There will come a day when heaven will invade earth once and for all, and we can find that ultimate, perfect Sabbath rest. And we can find it here and now in Jesus. I would encourage you, if you are tired, find your way to the Lord of the Sabbath. He will give you rest. Grace and peace be with you.